Thanks, Chris. Yes, we have got some money out of Innovate UK, and I make no apologies that several times during the talk I'm going to say thank you, so that Chris knows I'm really appreciative of what's happened here. I enjoy having the immediately after lunch slot, although I finished lunch with a nice green apple, and I'm conscious that as I'm talking to you and the video's filming me, I might have a nice big green piece of apple in there. So if at any point it looks odd, it's because I'm a fiddler. Some of you, I recognise a couple of people from the session that we had in Leeds, which was before I managed to get some Innovate UK funding, and I was waxing lyrical about capsule endoscopy, and now we've got that funding. For those who were at that event, a couple of the slides I've got you'll recognise, but the whole landscape has changed. It's all moved on in a few small months. So it's great to be here in Liverpool now, as well as in Leeds a few months ago, to talk about what's happening with AI-enabled capsule endoscopy. And there are some parallels with what I'm going to talk about, and I now have longer to talk by the sound of it if I want it. So there's some parallels with what Mark was talking about earlier on. You could replace radiologists with gastroenterologists for some of what I'm going to be talking about, but in some other ways what we're discussing here is very, very different. Right, I better see if I can work this. I can. So what I'd really like to do, I need to explain some of the background and context to this before I get into the AI piece, so that you can see what the challenge is. So I'm going to have a look at a bit at the nature and the scale of the challenge, and then I'm going to talk about what initiatives have happened to date, some of which are AI related, before I then move on to the current project and what we've actually achieved already and what we hope to achieve in the future. So what's the context here? So I'm sure everybody in the room has read all 136 pages of the NHS long-term plan. I certainly did the day it came out. I had to, because I was giving a talk on it the following day. And what's great about the long-term plan is that in 136 pages it has 536 initiatives. But there are some that are really critical. And in particular, the ones I've picked out here relate to what we're talking about today. There's a commitment to dramatically improving cancer survival by increasing the proportion of cancers diagnosed early from 1/2 to 3/4. We won't go into the detail of what half of what and 3/4 of what, but it's a big drive to increase early diagnosis of cancers. And on top of that generic, there's a very specific bowel cancer screening commitment to modernise the programme to detect more cancers earlier. Luckily, we have the solution to that problem here today for the NHS in England. And one day soon they'll have it. There's another thread, though, in the long-term plan that's really important, and it was mentioned this morning, and that's the thread about shifting care from the clinic into the home and the community. How can we take the load off pressured services by moving a lot of care to the community, and do the other great thing about keeping care in the community, stop killing people who go to hospital, because that's the sad reality, particularly for the frail and elderly, a bit like me, that it's best to avoid going to hospital if you can. And so there's a huge $4.5 billion a year going into that shift from clinic to community. And everything that we're going to talk about today in terms of capsule endoscopy fits with all of these long-term plan initiatives. Some of the specific things that are going on with endoscopy, and we'll talk a bit about, I'm sure everybody knows what endoscopy is. Anybody in the room had an endoscopy? Well, you'll like what I'm going to talk about then in a minute. So endoscopies are going through the roof. There's increase year on year, and as the stats show there, the number of endoscopies in 2016 was double that of 5 years ago, and it's projected to grow at 1 million per annum. Some of that is actually to do with the fact that there's more gastrointestinal diseases because we all mistreat ourselves. We all eat the wrong things and don't necessarily behave in the best way. Some of it's due to that. So there's a big growth in the need for gastrointestinal endoscopies, and we're also creating more demand ourselves. So we're dropping the bowel screening age from 60 plus to 50 plus, which is going to add another 14% requirement on top of the already growing need. And as a consequence of all that growth, the waiting times are increasing, and just like in the radiology example this morning, the number of staff available to do it is not increasing, it's decreasing, so we don't have the capacity
to actually deliver the endoscopies that we're needing. And that's resulted in the statistics in my, you don't have to read all these things, I'm going to say most of it, in the big box in the middle, that at the end of June 2018, 20 trusts were in special measures, a whole set of those for quality reasons as well as financial reasons, because they can't meet the demand. There's a huge backlog, and many of those clinics are having to run weekend working, and the weekend working doesn't work very well. Patients aren't as well prepped. There's a whole set of things that are making the backlog worsen, not get better. And as Bowel Cancer UK highlighted, they keep highlighting this, by the way. If you go onto the Bowel Cancer site, every month there's a new message about the fact that NHS England needs to solve this crisis. So statistics published in October revealed that around 5,000 patients in England were still waiting beyond the 6 weeks target for a colonoscopy. So there's big challenges all around in the system, and there's something needed to change what's happening. So here's the context. Can you still hear me while I wander over to my bag to get something out of my bag? So for those of you who've had an endoscopy, this is, sorry about this, does this ruin your video? I'm over here. For those of you who've had an endoscopy, this is generally what happens. You go to a clinic where there's some very expensive equipment, there's lots of cables and lots of staff. I'm back. Lots of cables and lots of staff, and it's not a pleasant procedure. Although the chap here looks reasonably happy because he seems to be standing up while it's happening to him, that isn't what happens. There's a lot of prep for it, it's time consuming. If you live somewhere remote, there's lots of travel to get to the clinic, it's inconvenient for you, it's invasive, and not often, but on a reasonable percentage of time, the tube that's shoved down inside you can cause some damage. So that's the current situation. The replacement is the capsule. I have one here. If you haven't seen one, I'm quite happy to pass it around. I haven't used this one, by the way. I tried to describe it as not much bigger than a paracetamol. Some of you will look at it and say, it's a fair bit bigger than a paracetamol. But most people are able to swallow it. So what we've got here with a capsule is a completely different way of carrying out an endoscopy. So instead of going off to a clinic, just swallow the little camera, passes through your system naturally, 99.5% of the time. Very occasionally we have to get it out. But most of the time it passes through comfortably and is just flushed away, because at the moment in society we're not keen on reusing them. This is quite sad, really. It seriously is. So at current volumes, that little thing that you have in your hand costs about £400. As what we're talking about today grows, that price will, like everything does, will drop. And we're expecting it to get under £100 quite soon. But it's odd that people aren't prepared to have it washed and use it again, because that tube that goes down your throat, or sometimes up the other way, depending on what's wrong with you, all that happens with that tube is it gets washed. So why would you be unhappy to swallow a used capsule? And in fact, and I'm going to tell you this for those of you who have an endoscopy coming up, some clinics in Scotland who are using the traditional approach have been closed down in the past couple of years because the tubes have been used, they're supposed to be used for 5 years, and in some places they're still using them after 15 years, and the bacteria on those tubes is just appalling. Much better to swallow a capsule that's only been used 5 times. So that's the situation. Capsule, so capsule has actually been around for, depending on the type of capsule, 10 to 15 years. It's not new technology. We've been able to do it instead of for a long time. But there are a number of factors that stop it taking off. Some of which I shouldn't really mention, but one is, if you're a gastroenterologist, the last thing you want is for a capsule to come along and prevent you from earning a good salary doing your job. But it's exactly like the radiology example. It's not about replacing the gastroenterologist, it's about giving them a set of tools that make them do the job better. So that's capsule endoscopy. Every presentation needs at least one slide where you can't read anything in it, and this, I've probably got more than one, but this one you definitely won't be able to read the detail, but if you ever look at it afterwards, it's, there's some important detail in it. So, oh, have I got a thingy on here? Oh yeah. So this top picture is the percentage of places that carry out endoscopies that aren't hitting the targets at the moment. And we've got England over here, Scotland here, and you can see, and this is 80% up here. So in different settings, the percentage of providers of endoscopy services that aren't able to meet the targets that are set out for them. And as you can see in Scotland, it's a particularly bad position. You know, these numbers are 60%, 40%. So they're way behind in hitting the targets they need to keep the number of people who need endoscopies through the system. This big unreadable chart at the bottom is all the endoscopies carried out in England, about 2 million of them. And the things I've circled down here are how many of those were done with a capsule. And it's about 13,000. So out of 2 million endoscopies carried out in England, only 13,000 of them are done by capsule. Even though the technology's there, and there are all sorts of barriers to making it through, and one of them is the barrier that AI is going to solve for us, is already solving for us. So what are we doing at the moment and how have we got there? So this is my second thank you. I don't know whether you're in the room when I did the first thank you, Chris, to Innovate UK, but everything that has happened on capsule endoscopy has been driven by Innovate UK. So it started in 2017, because you might be wondering why the Satellite Applications Catapult is giving a talk about capsule endoscopy. Did that occur to anyone? No? Okay. So in 2017, we persuaded Innovate UK, the Catapult persuaded Innovate UK to give us around about £300,000 to do 3 pieces of health work that are about using connectivity. Connectivity is the key to shifting healthcare from the clinic to the community. Because often what you want to do is transfer data, and if you can't have the connectivity, you can't deliver a service. And we did 3 things. That's a picture of somebody in an ambulance getting an ultrasound scan. We did something around diabetic foot ulcers, all enabled by connectivity, by satellite connectivity. And we did a capsule endoscopy pilot. And basically what we did was we went out to 2 very lovely parts of Scotland, the Isle of Skye and Ullapool, and we provided a capsule service in the most remote parts of Scotland. So the GP gets the capsule and a little belt sent to them. The GP fits the patient up with the belt and stays there while they swallow the capsule. They've done some prep before this as well. They've cleared the system out a little bit. Lets them swallow the capsule in, and then they go home. So that all they've done is they've gone to the GP practice, picked up the capsule, swallowed it, and then, oh, it's come back. Usually I don't get it back. Somebody keeps it. And what the satellite did in this particular case was it took the data pretty much immediately from the belt on the patients. And it took that data via satellite off to Denmark for analysis. Okay? And then the analysis went back to the GP and to Ravenmore Hospital to tell you, what does the data tell us about this patient? And the sad bit in all of that, though, was although that's a really good process, what was happening in Denmark was a person sitting at a screen looking at all the images that were coming through from the belt. And that's not really, in today's AI age, the best way to do it. So just before I go on to tell you what we're doing now, oh God, I can't operate technology. And I don't know, Chris, whether you're aware of this, so I'll tell you now. So that little piece of work in Scotland has led to a £10 million rollout of capsule endoscopy across Scotland, which starts in April. So Scotland has gone, because, and I can say this because I also work for NHS England, Scotland is much more agile. NHS Scotland is much more agile than NHS England. So it's gone from a small pilot in 18 months to a national rollout of capsule endoscopy. Nothing like that happening, any sign of that happening in England yet. But that's all as a result of the Innovate UK initial push funding, and the companies that are involved up here in making it happen are all growing significantly as a result of that piece of work in Scotland. So that's the backdrop to the challenge and what capsule endoscopy is about. So what's the AI challenge here then? So that capsule, as it goes through your system, depending on how fast it goes through, it varies a little bit from individual to individual and what you're doing. If you're out playing squash for most of the time that you've got the capsule in you, it tends to go through quicker than if you're having a nice relax in the garden. But typically, there's 500,000 images coming off that capsule. And as you can imagine, if somebody's sitting at the screen trying to look for polyps, the precursors of cancers, in those imageries, or to look for bleeding or other signs of gastrointestinal problems, and maybe looking for multiple things in each of the images at a time, it's a very challenging and time-consuming job, as was mentioned in the radiology example before. And I always liken it to what happens to you when you go to the airport. For the first 20 minutes, somebody's really having a good look at what's in your bag. But after about 20 minutes, you get a bit bored and you start missing things. And that's the reality of what happens in these circumstances. It's very easy, after you've been looking at images for an hour, to miss something important as a human operator. And it's tiring stuff. So this is where AI comes in. If we can apply a neural network approach, if we can use AI, there's potentially a game-changing picture here. So instead of getting the operator to look at all those images, let's get the images looked at. And there's basically 3 levels of the analysis here. We're looking at the different lightness and colouring of each individual image. We're looking at some of the shapes and basic characteristic of the images, and then the detailed shapes of each image. There's a layering that we're doing with the machine looking at the images. And the aim was to try and get the time taken to work through a set of images from around 3 hours to down to just a few minutes. But obviously, what you want is the machine to be at least as good as the human operator in spotting the things that you're looking for. And they are polyps, bleeding, and other signs of a problem. So the current project, which we're 5 months-ish into of the project, we've got our QBR next week. These are the partners. So although the catapult, I'm doing the pitch, the project is actually, the project is actually being run by a company that's set up in Raigmore in Scotland as a result of that little pilot. So the company's only there in Scotland because of that pilot and is now growing rapidly. So it's the lead, and there are a set of partners involved in delivering it. Some of the AI at the moment is being done out in Spain, because there's a history, 15 years, ever since capsules first came out, there's been work on AI in Spanish universities and a Spanish hospital, and some of it's being done by a company called Wolfram, who some of you may know if you ever ask Siri a question, or if you ask Alexa anything other than please play my favourite record, then, so that shows how old I am, record, track, then it goes off and asks Wolfram. So Wolfram's already doing a lot of AI at scale in a lot of industries. So there's a set of interesting partners involved in the project. And the aims are as up here. How can we use artificial intelligence and digital health? So I'm focused on the AI bit today, but exactly, is Mark still here or is he gone? He's gone, hasn't he? Because he would have said he was still here. So as Mark said, it's not just about the AI, it's about the whole process. So we're looking at the complete digitalization of the process, of which AI is a component. You have to make it simple and powerful for clinicians to use. So we're trying to use AI and digital health techniques to make the whole gastrointestinal diagnostic process faster, cheaper, so get the price of the capsules down as well, but also other elements of it cheaper, and scalable. So we want to be able to send those capsules out wherever we want, not just in Scotland, but across England, and to use them at scale, and to be able to analyse it using the AI. And through that, to solve that diagnostic bottleneck that I started off with. How do we tackle that bottleneck? And we have maybe you think this isn't very ambitious, but our aim is at least to contribute significantly to ultimately eradicating bowel cancer. Because bowel cancer is a cancer that if you catch it early enough can be completely cured. So catching it early is the key. And this to me is the key to catching it early. So we're looking at I've mentioned some of this already, we're looking at fully digitised pathway, trying to keep the row up. So the whole pathway at the moment often lasts months because the steps in the pathway of the referral and so on drag the process out. We're trying to make that whole process faster and put AI. So at the moment, the bit I'm talking about today is about AI for the image analysis, but we are looking at AI for the patient selection to decide which cohorts it works best with and so on. So that's basically it. Why wasn't it moving? I thought lots of us were going to put up receiver operating characteristic curves. We've had one today already. For those of you who love them, I won't need to explain what they are. For those of you who don't, I'm not going to say any detail about it. But basically, the curves are showing you, so at the bottom we've got the false positive rate, and up the side we've got the true positive rate. And what you want, sorry I've wandered away again, what you want in an ideal world is this curve to be as close as possible to the edges of this diagram, because it's basically saying when your machine looks at the images, is it identifying patients who have a polyp, a disease, a problem accurately, and is it not misdiagnosing people who haven't got one and telling you they have got something when they haven't. So the graphs that are there as a result of some fairly early work, which actually came from SBRI funding. It's still yours, I think, in the end, isn't it? It's all still Innovate UK money. So SBRI put a little bit of money in to begin with for us to do some early trials with around about 5,000 images to look at polyps, but we had up to 100,000 images to look at different bowel prep classifications. So it's some quite sizable data sets. And we did what all AI experts do. We train the machine, start it with some cats and dogs before it starts looking at some polyps. And as we added more and more images, so the yellow curve is, sorry, the blue curve is with 50% of the data that we had available. How well was it predicting with 50% of the data? And then with 100% of the data, you can see the curve starts to move on closer to where you want it to be. So we're able to show in this first phase tests that AI could feasibly do some accurate diagnosis. And there's a technical definition of what we mean by accuracy, but it's 98% accurate based on the data that we were using for this first trial. And then what we're doing now as part of the project, and we'll be talking about our QBR next week, is we're trying to just get that accuracy better and better. We're trying to push the curve further and further up to the right with more data, more training, more tweaks to the algorithm that's in there. And this is where it goes back to the black box question have we got our black box man in the room still as well? Maybe not. This morning. So we're tweaking the machine learning tools that we're using and the algorithms all the time to try and push that curve over to the left. And that's partly why I asked the question this morning, does it matter what's actually going on in the box if the accuracy of the output delivers what you want? Do you really need to understand? So I'm not an AI expert. I know enough about it because I'm a mathematician. I know enough about what's going on, but I don't need to know the detail. I could see what the graphs are telling me about the accuracy of the results, and that's good enough for me. But it is true that clinicians want to understand when a picture comes up and there's a polyp on it, why has that picture been selected? So we need to be able to explain what's going on. Now, what we're doing at the moment is we're trying to improve the accuracy of the tests, and then out of that to provide new computer-aided diagnostic tools for the clinician to say, here we are, here's some of the images that we've pulled out of those 500,000. So you don't have to look at the 500,000, you only have to look at 12. And here's why we've chosen those 12 and what they tell you, and our assessment of the probability that a person has the disease based on those images. So we're giving tools to make the gastroenterologist's job easier, providing the gastroenterologist believes in the data that we provide. So there's a whole set of activity going on in this project to design tools that will be easy to use and explain why we've done what we've done, with obviously the outcome for that tool of improving the reading productivity to get the pre-reading validation and all the components of the procedure reading down as quick as we can, so that we can, again, tackle that backlog. So that's what the project is trying to do. And the tools that we're providing, and I know you saw some images this morning, it's nice to see pictures of your insides as well, straight after lunch, I always think. So as a non-expert, I don't know. Maybe some people, I don't actually know whether that's a polyp or a piece of egg that somebody hasn't cleansed properly but anyway. But a gastroenterologist will, and the machine will, because the machine's been trained on thousands and thousands of these images. And what we're trying to do is to pull out a subset of these, and these have got highlights on them with some information, so that when the gastroenterologist is using this tool, not only will they see what's been selected out with polyps in and bleeding and so on, but a clear explanation of why we've picked out that image, which is probably what I'm saying on the next slide. So we're 3 months into running, we're 5 months into the project, but 3 months into running more and more trials with more and more data. And the curves on the left are doing what I said we're trying to do. We're gradually managing with more and more training to move the curve over to the left. Anybody who's really excited by this stuff can have all the data that goes with it if you want. You just have to email me and I'll send it to you. And that AI work that we're doing is definitely significantly improving results. So we're on track already to achieve the performance. So when we put the bid in for the funding, we said this is the sort of performance that we want to achieve. And we're already close to achieving the level of assessment that we wanted to achieve. But that doesn't mean we can't keep driving it and making it better. And we've got to productionise it too. And this bit, I've already mentioned this, the important bit is that what we're also trying to do is to get this explainability of AI alongside the actual results. Why have we got what we've got? So that it isn't a black box. And I think that has been a problem in a lot of AI solutions, that it isn't clear to the user why I've got the result that I've got. And we're working very hard to make that happen. Now there should have been one more slide, but I forgot to put it in. So I'm going to talk without it, but I'll leave that one up. So what we've got with this solution when it comes out is the ability, if we put the pieces of the jigsaw together, so we've got connectivity, satellite, but also 5G, now rearing its head much more rapidly. We've got the ability now to take the capsule endoscopy solution out into the community, because we can always get the information from wherever it is. With the AI, we've got the scaling. So we don't have to rely on a limited number of operators or staff problems. We can analyse as many images and as many people as we want. If we put those two things together with an automated digitisation process, then we have the potential to make a huge impact on not just bowel cancer, but other gastrointestinal diseases. I've missed a whole swathe of things out of this room, out of this presentation, which at least one person in the room will probably pick up on, and that's about, does capsule endoscopy actually, is it as good as the gold standard of endoscopy? And the answer to that really depends on the cohorts. You know, are you working with symptomatic patients? Are you trying to use it for screening? Where is it you're trying to use it? And there are plenty of studies now that show that for the right cohorts, it's as good as detecting, and in some cases, in terms of detecting polyps, it's better than the current gold standard. That doesn't mean that that's fully accepted yet by a lot of the GI community. There's still a battle to be had about, you know, do I accept that capsule endoscopy itself works, let alone do I accept that the AI makes me scale. And those battles are the things that we've got to have over the remaining length of this project. So we've got 18 months or so of the project to go. I have to spend a huge amount of my time trying to persuade NHS England to do what NHS Scotland have done, which is to believe that this is something scalable and to make a big difference to people's lives. That's it. Thank you.